All right, last question. This comes from somebody who decided to name themselves Glenn Ain't Vegan, to which I say, how dare you? I very much am vegan. I have all the proof, huge dossiers full of it, witnesses, everything else. At some point, I'll talk more about that at another time. But the question from this offensive, though I'm sure well-intentioned screen name is this. Hello, System Update. What do we think of the newly announced CBS Editor-in-Chief, Bari Weiss? And what does it mean for people like me, people who see it as a win for anti-establishment voices recapturing lost left-leaning institutions? Well, I think the least offensive part of that question is probably the false denial that I'm a vegan, because it's bizarre to see Bari Weiss as anything remotely resembling anti-establishment. So for those of you who haven't heard, we've talked about this before, but it's essentially more or less confirmed. It's expected that on Monday, this new entity controlled by Larry Ellison's family and his son David Ellison, Larry Ellison is the largest single private donor to the IDF in all of history. I don't understand why it's legal to be an American citizen and to reap all the benefits of the United States and then donate your wealth to a foreign military. But apparently it is, and he's taken advantage of that by donating many millions of dollars to the IDF. And he and his family are now taking over multiple media outlets. I've talked about this many times before, including last night. That includes Paramount and all of its entertainment properties. It includes CBS and its entertainment properties. It includes CBS News, and that means the CBS Morning Show, the Nightly News, 60 Minutes, every news program on CBS. He's in the process of trying to buy the company that is the parent company of CNN. And he also now has basically closed the deal with President Trump's help to become one of the most influential, if not the single most influential owners of TikTok. So you can dismiss CBS News and CNN as kind of old dinosaurs that don't matter. And it's true, nobody watches them, but they still do affect the culture. But TikTok undoubtedly is an extremely influential platform. There's no denying that. That's the reason why Congress was so determined to take it out of the hands of the people who previously had it and put it into the hands of the people who would control it much, much more in alignment with the power centers of the United States and their agenda, beginning with not allowing as much Israel criticism. That's already happening. So David Ellison, the son of Larry Ellison, the heir to this fortune, from the beginning, it was reported that he was trying to buy Bari Weiss's website, The Free Press, for $150 million. I think a lot of people were very surprised by that valuation because it's a good Substack. It's become a successful Substack. It's attracted investors, very wealthy investors who share Bari Weiss's worldview on Israel and I suppose other issues if there are other ones she cares about. So it's a successful business model. But it's not like the Free Press. It didn't even rise anywhere near, say, the level of the Daily Wire at its peak or other really successful independent media like, say, Tucker Carlson's show or Megyn Kelly's or Joe Rogan's or any of those. Its footprint is actually quite light. So $150 million, I think, to a lot of people felt like this is a radical overvaluation. But I think the much more important thing were these reports that CBS News didn't, under its new extremely pro-Israel ownership, didn't just want to buy the Free Press and integrate it into CBS, but also make Bari Weiss personally, elevate her to some extremely important role overseeing the editorial content of CBS News, almost being like an ombudsman-like figure, although an ombudsman understates the role because an ombudsman typically is the person who, after the fact in a newspaper, criticizes what a newspaper did. Most have eliminated that, but the New York Times, Washington Post used to have ombudsmen, and every Sunday they would say, oh, this big article ran, it created controversy, and they would be free to criticize the paper. That's what an ombudsman is. She's something much, much more influential, and the role seems to be that she's going to be called Editor-in-Chief of CBS News, which is quite a lofty title. But even more significant, reflective of her power, is that she's not even going to report to the president of CBS, which would be the normal reporting line. She's going to skip over everybody and report directly to David Ellison, who's the owner of this company that now controls these media properties. And, on the one hand, I understand people want to depict this as some sort of triumph of new media. Depict Bari Weiss as this kind of brilliant entrepreneur. And I guess on some level you can justify that credit, that praise. I mean, it is true that 5 years ago she was working for the New York Times as, kind of in the op-ed section, not running the op-ed section, and left under very kind of flamboyant circumstances, denouncing the New York Times on the way out. That's what led to a big part of the success of the Free Press initially. But I've always considered Bari Weiss a very shrewd operator. And I've mentioned this before. When she went to the New York Times, she was hired with Bret Stephens. No one really knew who she was, and all the liberals were angry about Bret Stephens because he was a climate change denier and he's pro-life. And they were, how dare you sully and befoul the sacred page of the New York Times with this conservative. And Bret Stephens to me was just a non-entity, like a totally standard neocon. I knew Bari Weiss was the much more significant hire. I could see what she was doing at the Wall Street Journal in how she was kind of tapping into this seemingly heterodox new media vibe. And she ended up coining the term the intellectual dark web for a bunch of people who are the opposite of dissident thinkers, people like Sam Harris and like Richard Dawkins and, people of this nature, Jordan Peterson. And Bari Weiss herself, I've asked before, like, somebody tell me a single anti-establishment view that Bari Weiss has. Bari Weiss to me is composed of two different views that have become the branding of her journalism career. One is anti-wokeism, and she did speak out against some of the excesses of wokeism and kind of like as a younger person, and not only as a younger person, but as a lesbian who had gone to an Ivy League school, who like had a very kind of East Coast vibe. Not the sort of icon of a young conservative operative who would denounce wokeism. She kind of made it cool to denounce wokeism. Like she kind of convinced parents who, and it was Ryan Grimm who once explained this on my show this way, and I thought it was very good, very, very, very astute, that she's someone who kind of gave permission to parents to believe that their purple-haired kids coming home from college denouncing them as transphobes and colonialist or whatever, and racist, that they were wrong and the parents were right. That's kind of the role she played. So she came at the right time in terms of wokeism, at the peak of wokeism and the backlash against it with Black Lives Matter and that whole George Floyd protest movement and everything that accompanied it. That's when she left the New York Times. She really chose the right moment when there was a big market for somebody saying, I'm this young, liberal, lesbian, coming from the New York Times, but am leaving because of the woke repression there. I mean, it was like crack, to people who were wanting to believe that there was a way out of this wokeism, like kind of validating the anti-woke agenda. But anti-wokeism, I mean, wokeism is dead. It's like opposing wokeism. It's so irrelevant and trivial. Who doesn't? There's like wokeism is alive like in blue sky and like in some sectors of like DSA, but the entire federal government is at war with wokeism. So if one of your defining views is you're opposed to wokeism, that doesn't make you an anti-establishment, contrarian, dissident, or whatever words are being applied to her. That just makes you an agent of establishment orthodoxy. I mean, everyone in power basically is an opponent of wokeism. And then her second cause, the overarching one, the cause of her life, is devotion to the state of Israel, support for Israel, demonizing its enemies. And obviously, that has long been the consensus view of the bipartisan class, of the corporate world, of the media world, of Hollywood, and certainly now it is the predominant view of the Trump administration and the US government. So this idea that Bari Weiss is some sort of countercultural dissident figure who somehow expresses views that are disturbing to the powers that be, it's like the opposite of the truth. And this is the reason why she got investments from like Mark Andreessen and Jerry Seinfeld and all sorts of other oligarchs and billionaires. If you're a threat to the power structure, you're not getting investments from those people. And maybe in a world that's kind of strange, where, those people end up feeling like they're on the outside. You can get investments from very rich people and at the same time be a dissident. I can imagine a world in which that's the case, but that's not the case for Bari Weiss. And that's why it's the opposite of surprise. It's not like, oh my God, it's so shocking. I never imagined the day when somebody with Bari Weiss's political views and ideology could possibly rise within CBS News. And what are we supposed to believe? That corporate media until now has been extremely hostile to those who support Israel? Is that the idea? Like, oh, finally, there's going to be a little bit of space after decades of hoping, futilely, that finally there's going to be some space within large media corporations for somebody who supports Israel. I mean, come on. And the same thing is like, oh, finally somebody who opposes the most extreme and now discredited parts of like the left-wing culture war agenda. Finally, someone like that is going to have a voice in mainstream media and corporate media and in power centers around the country. Bari Weiss is being elevated to exactly the point where she ought to be, where who she is aligning perfectly with this new position. Who she is somebody who gives a kind of new media, kind of edgy posture or vibe or brand to an extremely archaic and old and pro-establishment set of values. It's like when the CIA started touting their non-binary, neurodivergent, Latina operatives, or when the FBI has like LGBT Day or Women's Day and they hype all their female, agents or whatever. It's putting this like very superficial, seemingly new and progressive branding on what underneath is a completely unchanged, ossified, and extremely familiar pro-establishment agenda and dogma. That's what Bari Weiss is. That's what she's going to CBS to do, to create an illusion of something a little bit buzzier and innovative, when in reality, it's if anything, it's doubling down on political agendas that the two parties have long elevated, in large part because they see that polling is unraveling, particularly support for Israel in the United States. And so if you're the world's richest person or second richest person in the world, like Larry Ellison is, and you're 81 years old, and your primary political cause in life is supporting Israel to the point where you are the largest single donor to the IDF, and you see this polling unraveling for support for Israel, especially among young people, what do you want to spend your unlimited wealth on? Buying up all the media companies and the social media platforms that shape how young people think, and putting people like Bari Weiss, who are just, slightly updated vessels for your agenda, as the face of it to make it seem less stodgy and more interesting. And that's exactly what Larry Ellison is doing. And although it's very transparent and very banal, it doesn't make it any less unimportant. I think it's by far the most important media story in the world, that Israeli officials are talking openly about how social media and public opinion are weapons of war in the Israeli arsenal, as important as the bombs and drones they use against Hezbollah and Hamas, and are now proceeding, after saying it openly, to go about capturing for themselves, for the state of Israel, the most important means of communication that influence how Americans think, that we are being essentially taken over by a foreign influence operation led by the Ellison family, and using Bari Weiss as one of their many arms. And I think there is no way to understand all of these transactions and Bari Weiss's elevation without understanding that core mission that they're not really even hiding or being subtle about, but are being very explicit about out of desperation to just try and salvage some public opinion that has almost entirely evaporated among everyone under 50 when it comes to a willingness to continue to have the United States finance and arm and go to war for and die and give up our rights in the United States for the state of Israel. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.